Hi friends, and welcome back to this little mini series for you lovely creative people, creative ways of getting unstuck. So big shout out to you just showing up and wanting to even get help, because I feel like as artists we usually just do whatever it is we do. Who knows what that is? I surely don't. So what I want to talk to you about today is another tool that I've been using to help me personally, and I'm just sharing that as helpful as that can be for you in your creative practice. So as you probably may or may not know, I am an intuitive artist. So that means I just start something without really thinking about it. I will try to tap into an energy, an emotion, an experience, and see what comes through with that. But sometimes I just will put some marks down and see what is inspired by those marks, right? Well, when you're not planning ahead what you're doing, the truth is you're going to run into more opportunities. Let's call them opportunities, not pitfalls. You're going to fall into more opportunities where you will have some decisions to make and choices to move through. And that can lead to creative blocks. Now, no matter what you do in your creative world, you're going to hit blocks, right? So last time we talked about how to use techniques of like collaging, combining things, and using that as a way to kind of help get us past our opportunities and into our flow, right? So one of the things I want you to think about today is the principles of design. If you're not familiar with that, please let me know. We can maybe make that our Patreon live video this month if you're interested in learning more about the principles of design. But much like the elements of art, these are things that as creatives, they're the building blocks that we use to create. They are just simply the things that we pull from to make the art that we make. Whether it's painting, crocheting, sculpture, whatever it might be, the idea behind it is simple. We are looking at the most basic components. So everyone is probably a little bit more associated with the elements of art. That includes color, line, shape, value, form, texture, like all these different things. But you might not be as familiar with the principles of design. The one I really want to highlight today is contrast. When I start to work on a drawing specifically, and actually I'll pull this one up as my example, as I was working on this drawing, I had some decisions to make. This part, which I'm still not sure if I'm quite done with yet, and that's fine because every piece is a work in progress until we're no longer alive, and then it's done. But as I was working on this portion, it was open and just white. I hadn't filled in the black yet. I felt pretty stuck. I knew I wanted some like snake motif in some way. That's why I went with the diamond shape on top. Since that was kind of aligning with a book that my friend was reading out loud by Joseph Campbell. And what she was reading was bringing up snakes for me. So I knew I wanted snakes, but I wasn't quite sure how to, or like what would be most appropriate and most impactful. One thing that came to me as I was sitting there looking at the work and just kind of reflecting on it is, where could I include more contrast? So contrast is the difference between two things, right? So for example, you could use contrasting lines, very thin lines versus very thick lines. And that's actually something that I did up here too. little thin lines contrasting these really thick lines up there. Also, the type of lines, so wavy versus straight. In colors, that might be red versus green. They're across from each other on the color wheel, so they are opposites. They complement each other really well, but they also naturally can have some contrast to them, like purple and yellow, right? So what I thought about doing, what I decided to do for this drawing is that I wanted to incorporate some more contrast, because contrast can create more emphasis. It can create a focal point to the piece that you're working on, as well as just give your eye some differences in where it's looking. Some people, and of course this is a stylistic choice, you might want to do texture all over, and so it's really just a difference in the type of lines that you're using. Maybe you're working with value, that's the lightness or darkness of colors, from the darkest darks being black and the lightest lights being white. The difference of those things, you don't want as much of a contrast. You want a very valued piece of art. For me personally, if I'm feeling stuck, I think about the principles of design and think about how to incorporate something that will create some more impact on my drawing. So one thing I would encourage you to do is think about how contrasting elements can support. And there's no bigger contrast than black and white, right? So I decided to fill this in with black, and then I can do more with the diamonds later if I decide I even want to, right? But the use of contrast and thinking about, well, what could I do to create contrast that would create some interesting difference between two things in my picture, that can be one of those tools from the principles of design that are really, really helpful. And again, if you want me to talk about all the principles of design, I'll go into more detail. But there's balance, there's things like that. Rhythm, movement, these are things that just create something for our eye to follow in a way that feels good, right? Now, of course, when it comes to art that we are making and in ritual, it's never about the product, it's about the process. But let's face it, sometimes knowing certain aspects of art can just kind of help support you in creating what you want in the moment. It doesn't have to go online. You don't have to share it with anyone. You could even take it into your backyard as soon as you're done and burn it. But what would help you find more flow? Well, sometimes it's as simple as just making sure that you have the tools in your hand ready to go with what you want to do. So if you're feeling stuck on something that you're working on, you're just kind of looking at it and you're not quite sure where to go next, I will invite you to think about, well, how can you create contrast? Sometimes that's contrasting textures, colors, lines, shapes. Adding that little bit of contrast can create a lot of fun changes. So if there's a lot of organic shapes on your paper, using some geometric shapes. For example, your organic shapes might be wavy, wiggly blobs. That's great. Maybe what would help to give some more contrast would be some straight lines to create some different structure, or even more geometric shapes such as circles, squares, or diamonds. Those are just a few ideas, right? And this is a super general video, so it's really not getting into any detail. But that is a skill or a thought process I would invite you to use, is think about contrast. What do you have a lot of, and what can you add that would change the dynamics of your piece? That can sometimes be really helpful. So if you're feeling like, well, it's too dark, add more light. If it's all kind of blending in and there's no contrast happening, well, can you add some bright color, some super darks? If it's all mid-tone, how can we get it more dynamic in that way? The principles of design are a little more abstract in their concepts. When it comes to the elements of art, those are great, but they're way more structured. So if you want that detailed deep dive into the principles of design and how to include them in your art, especially when you're feeling stuck, let me know and I'll go into more detail. But that's just what I wanted to share with you guys today when it comes to some tips on getting unstuck. Create more contrast and see if that brings your eye and attention somewhere where you can keep going, or maybe it just wraps up the piece for you altogether. I am still very much in this drawing, so I'm going to keep working on that. Let me know what you have been working on, and I look forward to seeing my patrons in our next circle, date, and votes soon to come. Have a good one. Bye-bye.